And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Peter Johnson and Shaun Haney here with you. I want to remind everybody that we're doing these every Tuesday and Thursday. We may incorporate more days going forward, but they're going to be at a regular time now, 3 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Mountain. And as I mentioned, joining me right now is Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
It's going absolutely awesome, Shaun. It's a sunny day, or it's becoming sunny here, and you know what? I'm always happier in the sunshine, man.
Yeah, we've established long ago that how much sunshine it correlates directly to your mood.
Now wait a minute. I'm still in a good mood on a cloudy day. Come on, I'm just in a better mood when it's sunny.
And nothing impacts your energy level, that's for sure. Hey, everybody, if you have questions, you can leave them in the chat box, depending on what you're watching on. Of course, we're broadcasting today on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I also believed LinkedIn as well. So if you have a question for Pete and me, make sure you enter it into the chat box on the social media platform that you are watching. Well, Pete, here in the Palliser Triangle in southern Alberta, we're actually hoping today or this week we may get upwards of 2 inches of rain, which is a miracle. It never rains in the Palliser Triangle, at least that's what we thought. What's going on in Ontario?
Yeah, so actually we had big rains on the weekend, which we really didn't need in most areas. So for example, Essex County, I've got some really good friends down there on that flat, heavy, tough, tight clay. 3 inches of rain over the last couple of days, and they are flooded out. There are lakes in field. The ditches there are 8 feet deep. They are full right to the top. That is just a tough situation. All the way from 3 inches down there to up near the Tillsonburg, Aylmer, kind of on the sands, that area, I hear as little as 1/4 of an inch for those people. So they could have stood more because they're a sandier soil until you get a little bit further east there, and then you get heavy clay again. But anyway, quite a range. We didn't really need rain badly for most of the province. Some people, maybe you were saying Eastern Ontario, they were complaining about dry. Man, Shaun, at the end of the day, if it gets too dry on you in May in Ontario, you're slipping the clutch at getting things done, because the best thing we can have for planting is a drought. We're always too wet at seeding. We get 35 inches of total annual precipitation, all that winter moisture that we get. We need to get rid of it, for crying out loud. So I love dry weather in April and May, and let it start to rain the last part of May or into June. That's when we need moisture to come again. For the guys on the heavy soils, they weren't done planting. She's a tough go. For a lot of other people, corn's in, a good part of the soybeans are in, and a lot of the other areas didn't get flooded out. So yeah, we're in not bad shape.
So you're a big believer in plant into dust and the bins will bust, apparently.
Absolutely, baby. And you have good soil conditions, and I don't know, we rarely get the chance to plant in the dust here. And when we do, it's generally a good thing.
Well, I think it speaks, though, to the fact that what the impact of something like tile drainage has. It allows you to get rid of that water just in a decent time. If you didn't have tile drainage in some of those areas where you get 4 inches of rain on a weekend, wow, you'd be shut down for how long? Like, way too long.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, tile drainage lets us farm so much better in Ontario. And did we farm before it? Sure we did. But even if you go way back to my grandfather, through the Depression, nobody had work. And so he hired a bunch of people to come in and dig trenches and pick the stones off the field and put them in the bottom of those trenches so that he would have drainage in his field. So go back even that far, we knew that we had too much water in the spring. And I mean, the future of tile drainage, Shaun, is really that we have to store that water that is excess in the spring and then be able to push it back through the tiles in the drier part of the year in that July, August time frame. And we've got some real potential, but we've got some work to do to get there. But yeah, absolutely.
So it's been quite cold in Ontario. It looks like temperatures are going to kind of warm up this week. We're kind of past the worst of it, I think, based on the forecast I looked at yesterday. How are those early planted crops making out?
Cold. Are you insane, man? It's been frigid here. Like, what? Since when do we get -7 in May? We had 7 inches of snow for Mount Forest had 7 inches of snow a couple of weekends ago, and this is May, man. It's supposed to be summertime here. This is southwestern Ontario. That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
I can't believe how cold it has been, and not just for a short period of time. So April, according to my weather sources, April was 2 degrees colder on average than April of 2019. And April of 2019 wasn't warm. So that tells you how cold it's been. And up until today, or just recently, the last couple of days, May has been incredibly cold as well. So we've had this 6-week period of unbelievable cold. So what are the impacts on that? Well, all the early sugar beets, or many of the early sugar beets, are being replanted. And normally we plant them early and we get one little warm spell, and that's all it takes for them to jump out of the ground and go. They never got that this year. And so they actually just, it's like a cold weather stress or cold injury, because it didn't necessarily crust. Sugar beets don't do well with a crust, but we got no rain, didn't crust, and they just started leafing out, some of them, underneath the ground. It was just like it was too cold for them to come up. It was just always colder above than below. And so, yeah, you kind of go, wow, that tells you how cold. Meanwhile, -7, Shaun, -7. Just last week, a couple of nights, Monday, Tuesday, I think, or Tuesday, Wednesday, and you get -7 with alfalfa that is 6 inches high and wheat that is starting the flag leaf to emerge. You should absolutely decimate those crops. And we did not. And I've been out looking. The hort crops, they're in bad shape. So certainly we saw, the peaches, the plums, the cherries, a bunch of those crops. The asparagus, it just been beat on the head, because every time it tries to put shoots up, it gets frozen again. So there's a lot of the hort crops that suffered badly. But man, -7 with growth stage 37, growth stage 32 wheat, the head's halfway up the plant. We should have frozen that head out. I spent a lot of Monday looking at wheat, trying to find, where's it gone? Not Monday, Saturday, I guess it was. Anyway, I was looking I could find hardly any damage, a little leaf damage, and alfalfa should only stand -3. It went to -7 for 2 hours in some areas.
Right.
And it should be done. Nope, the alfalfa, a little bit of injury, it actually looks okay. How can that be?
Don't ask me. I want to know from you. Why is that?
So we actually don't really understand. We really don't. But what we do know is this. Jamie Larson, when he did his PhD, he was looking at spring wheat, planting it in November, December, seeing if we could get a winter hardy spring wheat, so that if we got caught in a situation, we could plant spring wheat late when the winter wheat got killed out, not need fertilization, be winter hardy in the spring. What he found was that if spring wheat, if it was growing and it got one cold night, it would be damaged tremendously. But if it got 3 cold days before it got that really cold frozen night, it would develop cold tolerance. So it's sort of like it acclimated to those cold temperatures. And then it didn't necessarily survive the winter. It would eventually get too cold, and sometimes you'd get 50% survival, sometimes not. But the difference between having 3 cold days before that one severe dip in temperature versus no cold days before that one severe dip in temperature was tremendous in terms of how the spring wheat would handle that. And so maybe when you get 6 weeks of cold, crappy weather, some of these plants have the capability to increase their frost tolerance as opposed to that one immediate dip in temperature. And in alfalfa, Darren Robinson this morning said in some varieties of alfalfa, they can actually develop proteins that will so when it's cold weather for a period of time, it changes the protein structure in the cell, and it actually makes some other proteins that the ice nucleates around the protein instead of being a free ice particle in the cell, and that protects the cell walls from being destroyed. So Do I know for sure why we didn't get more frost injury? Not a chance. We should have. But I think really cool stuff in terms of that. And I mean, gosh, if anybody's listening and they have a bunch of frost injury, we would like to know. But we've had a bunch of people out looking, and we're all really, really thankful we're not seeing way more damage than we are.
So basically, the plant gets acclimatized to the cold. No different than we do as humans, right? When you have a consistently cold temperature and it sort of slowly moves in that direction, it doesn't feel as cold as it could be if it was plus 10 versus minus 30.
Yeah, it's like you doggone Westerners, right? The Westerners, it's you're minus 40 all winter long, and it gets to be, I don't know, minus 5, and everybody winds their window down because it's so doggone hot out. whereas if you come to Ontario and we're plus 10 or something, you get a minus 5, we all think we've died. Yeah. It's so doggone cold out.
Oh, don't worry. Out west, we make a lot of fun of people in Ontario when the Toronto airport shuts down at minus 10.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you almost think that there must be something like that going on. Either that, or there's things going on in the canopy where the canopy was thick enough that we didn't get nearly as cold a temperatures as what the thermometers were telling us.
Interesting. Okay, what about some of the weed control pre-plant that went down? What about, how is it faring? Because it's been applied like 3 weeks ago?
Oh yeah, so there's lots of corn that got planted kind of that April 22nd, April 24th. That's sort of when the main corn planting started. And there was some corn planted before that, even as early as April the 6th. But most of the corn planting didn't start till, let's say, April 24th, 25th. And so either before they planted or right after they planted, they were putting on their soil-applied herbicides, and thank goodness, from a resistance management standpoint, almost everybody is using multiple modes of action in their corn crop, and that means they're putting soil-applied down with the glyphosate. And you kind of go, wow. Typically, we would say that you get 21 days of control out of those soil-applied herbicides. That's, if you can get 21 days of control, that's pretty good. Maybe some products would give you 28, some only give you 14. And this is what today is May the 19th, I think. Yep. Yeah, May the 19th. So we've been down for a month. So that control's got to be running out. Well, actually, we don't think it is running out. And that's because the breakdown is actually from biological activity. And we've had no biological activity. Man, look at the nutrient deficiencies we're having. It's cruel what's going on out there. Well, if there's been no biological activity, then almost for sure that herbicide we put down a month ago is still there at full strength because there's been no activity to break it down. Now, there's a few herbicides that are broken down by ultraviolet light or by water degradation, right? There's a few that might be, but for the most part, we think we're in pretty good shape, even on the weed control front. What I would say is keep scouting, right? Because typically, you'll see escapes within about 14 days once things warm up, and so scout. But no, we think we're okay. We think that herbicide's fine.
Mr. Bill comments, we need some global warming. I think he's referring to the fact that it is super chilly and we just, across the country, have not warmed up yet.
Yeah, no, I absolutely kind of go, wow, where is global warming? But I mean, that's from that perspective, they say that we should expect these wilder temperature swings, right? And so when we get these cold, even though it feels like it's not global warming, maybe it is because we are seeing those wider swings. And don't tell me we're going to make it up by having it 40 degrees in the summertime here. I do. The wheat crop doesn't like 40 degrees, Shaun, so we don't want to see that happen. The wheat crop, by the way, it likes cooler temperatures, so it's doing fine. Thank you very much.
Phil Shaw, of course, Phil from the deep southwest of Dresden, Ontario. He got 3 inches of rain on the weekend. He said temperatures warm in the deep southwest of Ontario today after 3 inches of rain. Maybe replant decisions. Ooh.
Yeah, so that's always tough, right? And from a corn standpoint, you really have to look at when can you replant. And so if you say, man, now Phil's in the deep southwest, and these decisions would be different if you were. So Arthur, we don't get enough heat at Arthur to be replanting corn on the 1st of June. Last year, where Phil farms, man, a lot of corn didn't get in till the first week of June or the 10th of June, and it still was 200 bushels per acre. So you got to be a little bit careful where you position or where you farm when you talk about these decisions. But there's a great calculator online at gocorn.net on these replant decisions. Most of the time, if you have corn that was planted the 24th of April rather, the 24th of April, and you can get 23,000 final stand, you're probably leaving that stand. The chances of out yielding it with a full stand of 32 or 34,000 planted, I don't know, the 25th of May probably before you can get back in on 3 inches of rain. I think you just kind of say, no, we're going to stay with what's there and leave it at that point. Once you drop below about 18,000, then you really start looking at replant in a more significant way. But go to gocorn.net. There's a really good resource there to look at those decisions. On the soybean front, there's not soybeans in, but if you have 100,000, 110,000 evenly spaced, then you leave them. The problem is on the really tough clays, you probably need at least 120, 130 because you don't get the same growth on a tough clay that you do on a nice loam soil, and it's never uniform, right? It's just never uniform because the water lays longer in the low spots, and now you got nothing there, and you got 150. With soybeans, you just go replant. Just drive through what you need to drive through and plant in the thin spots and don't plant in the thick spots. And you're best to send either your 16-year-old son or your hired man out to do it, because it is the most thankless task I have ever seen in my life. And in fact, most guys, after they do it for a while, they just leave the drill down all the time or the planter down all the time because you're picking it up when you should be putting it down, and you're putting it down when you should be picking it up. And it's a nightmare.
We got varied conditions here in the West. In the southern tip here, like we mentioned, the Palliser Triangle, it's okay, but it's been quite dry the last 4 years. We're hoping for that rain this week. Like you look around the Edmonton area, they're begging for no more moisture. And same in northern Saskatchewan. What does this cooler weather mean for the spring wheat crop that's been planted, Pete? We've had this cool conditions. I would think us here in the south where we're dry, not as worried about seedling disease, but in some of those more wetter areas, if they have been able to get the wheat in, probably a little bit more concern.
Yeah, and so most diseases like wet weather, right? For sure. But also most diseases need some warm temperatures. So you're wet and cold, the crop's slow to come out of the ground, which makes you worried because it gives a longer time period for the diseases to attack. But the disease isn't attacking nearly as much because it is cold. So we mostly see the most diseases when it's kind of medium temperatures and extremely wet. The crop doesn't grow well because it's wet, and that's when we get the most disease. Flooded conditions and reasonable temperatures. When it's cold and wet, most of the time diseases are not that major an issue, just because they don't like the cold weather any more than the crop does. So would I be concerned? I'm always concerned. But would I think it's going to have a major impact? No, generally speaking, cool temperatures, wheat wins, and diseases lose.
Question here from Class 185 via YouTube. He says, hi, how do you better avoid wheat eye spot root diseases? What to do if it's in the field?
Oh, so it's called rotation. So whether it's eye spot or whether it's take all or even fusarium crown rot, any of those wheat root diseases, they can live in the soil for quite a period of time. There are some varietal differences, and some areas that have a lot of problems actually rate their wheat varieties for their resistance to the disease. We don't do that here in Ontario. We don't generally see that much. But you got to get out of wheat for a while. You absolutely have to find another crop. So grow peas, grow lentils. I'm not sure where this question is coming from, but you get more of that disease when you have more of the host crop growing. And so even if you switch out to grow oats, for crying out loud, diseases, but it's a different member of, like, it's not barley and wheat cross over. Oats and wheat don't. So even in Western Canada, in the northern tier of the US, you can grow oats as a crop and reduce that disease inoculum. But you have to get to a rotation. There are some seed treatments, like certainly some seed treatments will help. Take All in particular, they have a seed treatment in Europe that is quite effective against Take All. Unfortunately, that's not registered here in Canada, so we don't have the same opportunity. A few other management tricks: a little bit of potash right with the seed, so potassium chloride right with the seed. You got to be very careful, because too much potassium chloride, you get seed burn, and then you reduce the stand. But the chloride in that will help suppress the disease. And that's just those are about the only things you can do.
Okay, Ontario Ag Guy asked, do you think there'll be a lot of fusarium in the wheat this year? What's your crystal ball tell you?
Oh, man, come on, Shaun. Even you got to know that I have no clue about that right now, because it's all about weather at heading, right? Weather at pollination. That's what drives the fusarium in the wheat crop. And we always have inoculum. Ontario is the epicenter of fusarium head blight in wheat, and it's our number one nemesis. So if it rains 5 days, that week before heading, and it rains more the week or 10 days after heading, we're going to have a fusarium problem. Full stop, right there. If it's dry through that period, then our fusarium risk is much, much lower. I don't know. The weatherman can't tell me what the weather's going to be out that far. I guess I'm as good as the weatherman. I could flip a coin like they do maybe, but I'm being hard on them anyway. We don't know till we know what the weather is, right?
Okay, here's a question from Kyle. Are you finding reduced weed control in wheat following white beans, where we can now only use Aragon LQ versus when we could use glyphosate plus Aragon as a pre-harvest desiccant?
Yeah, and so I think the answer is absolutely. We're seeing some more dandelion pressure come through. The Aragon's, it's got some control on fleabane, but it's really too bad, because Aragon works better when we can tank mix glyphosate with it. The two, even on glyphosate-resistant weeds, which is weird, you'd say, well, how can that be? But the data is quite clear. And so on some of those tough-to-control weeds like sow thistle, normally if you had sow thistle out there, you had dandelions out there, when you put glyphosate in the burn down, you got really good activity on them. Now that we're down to Aragon, it's a good product, but no, it's not a glyphosate. And so we are seeing and are going to see more weed issues in winter wheat because of that. And it'll be mainly the perennials and the harder to control winter annuals. Yeah,
the challenges across the country with these pre-harvest, weed control desiccants, right? It's are you desiccating or are you looking for weed control? We've seen some challenges in oats. We've seen some challenges in pulses, where it's not friendly to what's convenient for the farmer. It has a lot to do with some of the end use markets instead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an end use market thing, and that you have to grow the crop that the buyer's going to buy, and that means if glyphosate's out, it's out, unfortunately. And realistically, glyphosate is a poor desiccant. It's a weed control chemical, much more than a desiccant. When you spray it as a desiccant, it's very slow, but it does work, and it helps all the other desiccants work better. Yeah,
it's also
can't
cheap.
Use it. That's just well, the upside is if I want to control these perennial weeds and winter annual weeds, what's my number one recommendation, Shaun? Any idea?
No, go ahead.
Spray in the fall.
Oh yeah, well that's like
kill them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Because
I missed that one. That was a softball.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to. Anyway, no, it's too bad. It is too bad we've lost that tool in the toolbox, but it's life.
Yeah, it's frustrating. Hey, another topic that you and I were discussing was the issue of sulfur deficiency. What's going on here?
Oh man, it's not just sulfur deficiency. So I'm a huge promoter of split nitrogen applications on wheat, because it gives you so many more management opportunities. And if we put 50, 60, 80, 90 pounds of nitrogen on my wheat crop in early April, versus I put the full deal, which for a lot of guys is 120, 135, maybe 150, and the sulfur with it. Well, gosh, by this time of year, they're always the same. They're just always the same. Not in 2020. In 2020, all of a sudden, where I put the 150 pounds of nitrogen on, it's way better than where I only put on 75 pounds of nitrogen. And you're going, like, what the heck? Well, because I think it's been so cold for so long. Normally, the nitrogen moves with the water to the plant, and 75 pounds is enough to get it to this point. This year, so cool, so little growth, so little root growth, so little transpiration through the plant that it's not sucking the water to the plant, and so the nitrogen's not coming. And the sulfur, we've never seen this much sulfur deficiency. We've never seen this much manganese deficiency in the wheat crop. And it really comes back to biological activity in the soil. The same thing that's saving us on weed control is killing us on some of these nutrient deficiencies. And, there's growers out there, heavy livestock guys, never seen sulfur deficiency in the wheat crop before. Man, they got sulfur deficiency all over the place. And if you see it, if you got lots of nitrogen on the wheat crop and you see those yellow patches starting to show up, and they're not in lines, they don't generally follow the drill or whatever, they're just circular patches here and there, get some sulfur on, because almost for sure that's going to cost you, 10, 15, maybe 20 bushels per acre if you don't correct that deficiency.
What about
Same with manganese.
Yeah, Mr. Bill asks, what about ESN instead of that split?
Yeah, so the big problem with ESN is that ESN would be temperature and moisture, right? It's a poly-coated granule, and it's temperature and moisture that determine when that ESN releases. So if I had ESN out there with my urea, well, it's been way too cool for any of that ESN to release yet, and so it hasn't become available at all, and it'll take a while for it to warm up and get it to be available. If I go out there immediately, and there's lots of growers who were out there on last week or on Saturday before the rain came, on Sunday morning, guys were still going strong because the rain didn't come till later in the day that we thought. And getting that second nitrogen application on, well, you get it on there as urea, as 28% ammonium nitrate, it's immediately available. We know it's there. Whereas the problem with ESN, good product, we just don't know when it's going to become available. And so does it work? Some of the time, yes. This year, I'm a little afraid it won't become available quickly enough.
I was driving around yesterday, and I don't know. It's not a side-by-side, of course. I'm just sort of anecdotally comparing emergence, what I would want to see versus what I have seen. I saw some real fields that looked a little bit patchy coming out of the ground. Is that kind of due to the cold weather, Pete, or are there other issues there? So
it absolutely could be the cold weather. It's like, okay, so Shaun, you just did the farmer thing to the agronomist. You gave him, you did. You're the farmer, and I'm the agronomist, and I'm really used to this. And so you ask me this question that seems really simple, and I should be able to just say, oh, well, it's X. Well, wait a minute. Like, give me a bit more of the background. Is this black dirt? Because, if it's worked soil, if you've gone through there with that stupid hoe drill and you think you're no-till, but by the time that stupid hoe drill goes through the soil, everything's black. Well, where the soil is lighter color, it doesn't attract the sun as much. And if it doesn't attract the sun as much, then it's cooler. And so our emergence will be a little bit delayed. So is it a soil moisture thing? Is it a planting depth thing?
No, it is the latter. It's lighter ground that's been worked. It's on irrigation. It has been worked. Yeah.
So if it's lighter ground, then yeah, absolutely. It's the cold weather, and that lighter ground just hasn't attracted as much sun and warmed up as much and given the wheat a chance to get going.
Okay, can we just back up here? The fact that my question actually did make sense then?
Yeah, except right out the gate, you didn't give me nearly enough information, okay? Like, come on.
Is that what we're doing? Okay. Mm-hmm. I see. Well, what do you expect for emergence out east? Because, that same coolness with what we've seen right now with corn and beans.
So, the really early planted corn is emerging. And I think it'll be fine. The stuff that was planted early. Things going on with seedling morphology, and we don't quite understand why that is. The seeds are splitting open, the coleoptiles all swelled up. That corn I'm worried about. A bunch of the other corn, the stuff that was planted April 22nd, it's starting to spike through if it wasn't planted really deep. Now, most of us went deeper because when it's cold, you go deeper, and so it'll take a little longer to get up. But the deeper you go, typically, the more uniform that emergence is, the higher your yield potential is. And most of the crop right now, I think, is in really good shape. The spring cereals, the frost-seeded spring cereals are just roaring ahead. The dry soil seeded spring cereals, again, still in early. They look really good. Emergence looks good for the most part, unless a grower dried the soil out and didn't plant deep enough stands, just look excellent.
Jim Hale, who farms in Lancer, Saskatchewan, he just said, so hoe drills for the win in cold temps.
Yeah, hoe drills never for the win, man. It just doesn't work.
Oh, you're being
touche, Jim. Touche.
Jim got that. Jim got that in there for sure. So, yeah. Pete, what are you watching for here in the next couple of weeks? What, like, agronomically, what are the things that you're really looking as indicators for how good of a start we're off to?
Yeah. So now is the time for the corn that's in the ground. We're out there scouting to see how it's coming up. And what's really cool about this year is that we've had ample opportunity for people to plant when it's been cold. There was some plots that went out right before the rain on Sunday. One plot got 3/4 of an inch of super cold rain on top of it. We want to watch that to see, does soil temperature even matter when we plant corn or soybeans at all? Chris Albach from Pioneer did a really cool trial, planted some corn and did it at 2 sites. At each site, 720 kilograms of ice. 720 kilograms of ice, and went in and piled the ice on top of the rows so that it would melt and freeze those seedlings out. We are going to learn so much, but look at your stand uniformity. Look how it's coming up, how uniform it is. Watch for weed control for sure. Do your stand counts, but it's uniformity, and it really is evaluate how good a job your planter is doing. On the wheat crop, we have powdery mildew showing up in a few fields in wheat. Now, Shaun, this should not happen. Like, powdery mildew wants 15 degrees Celsius. Yeah. It hasn't been 15 degrees Celsius here, like, hardly at all yet. How can we have powdery mildew? That's really weird. Kerry Davenport, an agronomist in Bruce County, went to a field 15-inch row wheat. And you would say 15-inch rows, oh, come on, that's useless. Western wheat, man, that's so wide, like, holy, there'll be no disease. Powdery mildew goes around the corner. Same planting date, same seeding rate, same variety, 7.5-inch rows, no powdery mildew. Now explain that to me, because that just goes against all my agronomic.
It does, yeah. Okay, I got nothing. Do you have an answer? Because I got nothing.
No. The only thing I can think of is that if it's the same seeding rate, we doubled the seeding rate in the row in the 15-inch rows. So maybe it's so thick in that row that it's just plant to plant and humidity and it got. I don't know, but that's a stretch, Shaun. It's a huge stretch, and what it tells me. And Albert Tenuta, the pathologist here in Ontario, our excellent Ontario provincial pathologist, will be proud of me to say this, because I talked to him this morning and he says, Johnson, what you've just proven is that you have to scout every field. Just because one field has it or another field doesn't have it does not mean that every field in the region is going to be the same.
Okay. You know what? I got to ask you something. I've been meaning to ask you this for a couple of weeks on Real Ag Radio when you come on Mondays. We see a lot of people burning stubble, whether it's hemp stubble or, of course, something like flax. What do you think about burning stubble to deal with some of that trash?
Yeah, so it's ridiculous, okay? Because what you're doing is you're burning your carbon, and that carbon should eventually become organic matter. You burn it, it ain't ever going to become organic matter in the soil because she's up in the air as carbon dioxide. The problem with hemp or flax, and you and I both know this, Shaun, is that stuff, it takes forever to break down, and it wraps like frickin' wire around everything. And so in some of those situations, maybe you have no choice. But from an environmental standpoint, from a soil health standpoint, it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I know in some parts of Western Canada, they still burn wheat stubble. Well, come on now. From a soil temperature standpoint, I get it. But from the wheat stubble doesn't wrap on stuff. And so it's kind of like, man, are you ever giving up a lot in terms of that soil health and soil organic matter? I'm against it.
But but is there other options? Because that's what I hear from growers. When we have these interactions about this topic, it's like, I got no other choice. I just don't know what to do to deal with all that trash.
Yeah. And so we have to figure out what those other options are. And I'm not sure that we know what that is. Can we run through it with a heavy harrow or something, right? A Phillips harrow, a Phoenix harrow, something like that, move the trash around? In Ontario, when we get really super heavy trash, we get 280 bushel corn. What really astounds me is that the number one tool that most people end up reaching for is an RTS or something similar. And all it is a bunch of straight coulters and a harrow pulling behind, but it moves the residue around. And so underneath the residue is wet, between the residue is dry. Well, it moves the stuff around, and then things dry out because we've opened it up and just aired it out that little bit and let some air get into the soil. I'm not in Western Canada. I'm not looking at everything that we're doing. The other thing that I will say is that oftentimes, if you just do a better job of residue spread when you're combining, that's
like those residue choppers.
Absolutely, get a red chopper, right? Like an aftermarket chopper, or go to the high-end chopper from John Deere or whatever. I walked a wheat field last week, a 45-foot head. The combine spread the 25 feet wide, and you could see every chaff strip. That 25 feet wide was not as good as the 20 feet in between. And you just go, man, like that, we just got to do better than that. And that was soybean stubble, right? So it's not, it was 65, 70 bushel soybeans. It was good soybeans, but still there's no residue behind a soybean crop.
But do those like the, Redicop has that, everybody talks about that one. Like, do some of those choppers, do they probably wouldn't do as good of a job when we're dealing with really wet harvests, or am I wrong?
Yeah, so in Europe, right? You go to Europe and they get a perfect spread, and they're tough at harvest. England, England's a dry climate, but it's just misty all the time. And the straw is always tough. They pretty much dry all their crop, like a super long season, but they can never get it under, 18% moisture. So they just always harvest at 20% moisture. The straw is just wringing wet. And so to get a good straw spread pattern there, they will actually limit the width of the header to what the straw chopper can spread. And saw a really great video from John Deere. They're working on a new X9 combine, I think it was, and they were purposely trying to figure out how to get that 45-foot wide spread with really tough straw. So I think it can be done. I'm not saying that we have the technology yet, but dang it all, that's often where the problem starts.
Ian McDonald says, but guys in the East have moved away from RTS because it doesn't move enough soil, so Salford went CTS.
So, and hi Ian, thanks for chiming in. It's good that the dear Dr. McDonald is following us. That's very cool. And you're right. Salford went away from that, and yet a lot of growers I talk to come back to that RTS. They try the CTS for a while, and it's too much. It's way too much soil movement. And I don't know whether the other thing we've gone to is not a CTS, but it's more tillage in the spring. And so whether it's a horse joker or it's an Amazon Catros, or there's so many of those high speed, shallow, full tillage discs, the Lemkins, and they'll just go through once shallow. The beauty of some of those high-speed discs, and I didn't realize how important this was till just recently, but a lot of the high-speed discs, so a cultivator, you pull into the field with a cultivator and you set the depth on your wheels. Well, you've got a set of wheels here, a set of wheels here, a set of wheels. Well, man, your depth is never perfect. Here, the cultivator teeth are out of the ground. There, they're going deeper than you'd like. With those high-speed discs, there's a big gang across press that keeps your depth consistent across the entire unit. And so if you set her for 2 inches, typically it's 2 inches deep. You have 2 inches of dry soil. You can just go in and hit that 2 inches of dry soil with that residue, kind of blend it together. And I worry about compaction below that, but dang it all, a lot of guys making that system work this year. And part of that is better depth control.
Good stuff. Hey, Pete, we went over by 10 minutes. We were only supposed to go for 30. We went for 40. We had a great attendance today. Really appreciate all the questions, everybody. Make sure you check out We Pete's Word. You can download the podcast on iTunes or find it at realagriculture.com. Pete, it's uploaded every Wednesday, correct?
Absolutely. I've been pretty good, Shaun. I hardly ever miss. Every Wednesday, we try to get her up there.
Good stuff. Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in to RealAg Live, and we'll be back on Thursday at 3 p.m., One Mountain. Everybody have a great day. Thanks a lot for getting real and getting connected with Real Agriculture.